Okay guys, this is the beginning of our build series for our very fast little dart of a elastic launched glider plane. This is because I wanted to make one that was better than the balsa gliders I had as a kid. I've seen other videos where people were making them and they really didn't fly well. And they're like, oh yeah, this is great, 3D printed, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, great, you need a $600 computer and a $400 3D printer along with $100 worth of materials to make the darn thing. Okay, well, that's not really appropriate for kids. This isn't the kind of thing they could make. I've made one that any kid could make themselves, but mom and dad should help with this, so I want you to recruit them right away because this is a build that requires some attention to detail. You have to get it right. The proportions have to be right. As you can see, this one is really perfect, and it flies accordingly. The closer you get this to perfect, the better it'll fly. But look here. I've got different amounts of glue, top and bottom. It's not perfect. It's not super neat. It's a little messy. But it flies great, guys. Flies absolutely great. I didn't even make this very aerodynamic. It's just a little lump of foam stuffed on there. There's glue gun glue in here to hold it all together. But there's a few different types of glues. I use CA glue and I use glue gun glue. And there's a reason for that. Glue gun glue I use in the tip and to hold the tail surfaces on. Now I'm going to walk you through this step by step. We're going to start right now, and this is going to be an orientation video to help you get all the materials you're going to need together. And some of the things might surprise you, like an agenda and some paper, because you're going to have to do some designing of your own and some planning. But it's easy to do. I'm going to walk you through the stages, and when you're done, you'll have an awesome little RC airplane. Now, I'm going to build 3 different airplane gliders. And the reason I call this really an airplane and not a glider is because these aren't meant to be hand thrown. This actually needs a fair bit of speed. However, what if we make something with a big wing like this? A much bigger wing. A much bigger chord. And then we put a cap on it, like this, that fits over the edge of the wing, like this, and covers that hole. Covers it perfectly. Okay. Well, for that, we want a template, which is what I've done. I've cut one that fits, that is the right shape. We're going to take that, put it on paper later, and trace that out. For the wing itself, I don't actually need to do that because the agenda, the pieces of plastic that come out of the agenda that I showed you in the first video, actually make this wing perfectly. All you have to do is fold it in half. I didn't even have to trim it. Nothing. On the other wing, I made it a little shorter because I wanted a narrower, faster wing and cut this back edge off and glued it down here. That's the only difference. One is very thin. This one's fairly thick. This one's actually made out of thicker material that's rough, slows down the wind a little. The other one is made out of the exact same material, but you can see the thinness of this wing. It's doubled over just like this one, but it's made to be a flat, thin wing with a very light lift profile, meaning this one has to go faster than this one in order to fly. This one is a slow flyer, but when I launch it, it'll fly with half the throttle input, basically half the elastic pulled back to, half power. It'll fly like that and fly quite well. Whereas this one, if you don't give it at least that, it doesn't really fly at all. It just noses over into the ground. The harder a pull you give it, the faster it is, and the better it works. Now, I apologize for the footage of this. It will get better as we go on, but it will be good enough to show you everything that's involved. So, we're going to pull over one more material that we need for this, and this is child's play mat. I cut these pieces off one at a time. You can see some of them missing here, and I use them to make both the foam end here and this guy. Now, this guy is very, very important. And this is why I needed to do an orientation video. It's going to take me several videos to show you this. But I wanted to show you how this works. So I take one of these little fellas, like this. I've cut it off from the board. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a piece like this. I'm going to punch a hole through this end and run my carbon rod, voila, down the middle. So that it sticks out like this. And then I'm just going to trim it, and that's my nose cone. Really easy to do. On the other end, I'm going to cut a little hole in it, and I'm going to push a pen lid into it. And then I'm going to put that all on the tip of it, glue it in place, and put this on. But that will not be your first step. It'll actually be one of your last steps. The first step is actually to cut your carbon rod to length. You might think, but really it might not be, depending on the one you build. And if you're designing your own, I actually recommend you take the length of carbon rod you think you need, add an inch, then build that. And the reason is sometimes you need to have the tail really far back like I do. And the more length you have on it, the less distance you'll need it back from the nose to keep it balanced correctly. This one balances like a bird of prey. It balances perfectly. But it's set up really far back from the wing. Really far back. I mean, this little thing is a little rocket ship, guys. An absolute little rocket ship. Now look at this. I've only got the 2 fingers touching it, and it balances beautifully. Beautifully. You can see it's not actually touching my fingers here, and it just rocks back and forth perfect. This is where you want it to balance on the wing, and you're going to put your fingertips like this underneath the bottom of the wing like this, right about here, guys. Right about here on the bottoms of the wing. And when you do that, you'll see whether or not it balances right. And if it does what mine does, and sits just a tiny little bit nose down or dead perfect level, you got it right. If not, you can always add a tiny little bit more glue. It's one of the reasons I recommend you use a pen cap. Aside from being great, they have tons of space inside, and you can put as much glue in as you need in there. I put a fair bit of glue in this when I put the cap into it, and then I put a fair bit of glue in this, knowing that I needed nose weight. And just from experience and whatnot, it just happened to come out absolutely flawlessly perfect. I also added tape to the tail to reinforce these, but that's not actually necessary. I will show you why. When I built this one, I'm still planning on making it an RC, which means these flaps were a little too loose, and they wouldn't hold the position without the control arm from the servo. Because of that, they weren't quite stiff enough for what I wanted to do with this one in the end, which was to make an elastic launched glider. Up until I have the money to build the RC version, this is the best I can do. Now, this turns out to be the most important piece right here, other than the wing, and this is the part that mounts the wing and holds its shape. This is, again, just another little piece of that foam stuff with the carbon rod run through the middle of it, and I use it to lock the wing in place. So once you push that in place, you push it all tight together, you get the wing perfect, you camber the wing, I'll show you how to do all that. You'll glue it in place, and now it's locked in. And it works great, and it holds the wing. It also absorbs shock. So when this takes a shock, it sends a shock down this carbon tube, which helps to be absorbed by this and doesn't actually go into the wing. It means it's very tough and reliable, and the whole thing can take a really solid hit and not take any damage over and over and over, a dozen times, 100 times. This is a great little vehicle for kids, and if you are out there looking for a cheap present for your kid, some little project you can do together on the weekend, this is a great little 1-hour build that you and your kid can do together, and they will gladly spend the rest of the day outside playing with this thing, because they're awesome, or until they lose it. That being said, what if we make a slower flying one? So this is the goal. You can see the wing is much bigger here, and I'm going to show you a comparison here. The wing is much, much thicker. The thicker it is, the more resistance it has, but the more lift it can create. This is actually going to create a lot more lift than this, which means it'll fly slower. Now look at the width. And then look at the length, and realize that these are both made out of the exact same thing. They're both made from one of these guys, which is the plastic out of that Agenda. That's all it is. And then I fold it in half, and I use this piece to keep it in place. So this is your orientation. This is where we talk about the pieces you'll need. And this might be a 15-minute video, but it's worth the watch, guys. So this is off an umbrella. This is part of the internal structure. They all have to fold open, and they all need something like this, a slider that slides up and down the carbon tube. That gives me my carbon stock, enough to make 2 airplanes in one of these, which is great. And it gives me one of these in every arm. This umbrella had 8, as they usually do, which means for every one of these, you could make 8 airplanes, guys. Now, considering that's a $20 umbrella, in this case, I found a garbage one that was carbon fiber and just used it. So all the pieces I need here, I got for free. But there's going to be more than that. Now, aside from your cardstock to make your wing, your CA glue, you're going to need a few other things. You're going to need some tape. In fact, I'm using tape like this that's nice and thick. It's double-sided, but I kind of get the sticky off the one side just by handling it. Hold it in place, glue it down, and that is what stiffened my ailerons and rudder, and that is also my elevator, are my ailerons. So the tail had to be pretty big. This is a really nice size. Because this one flew so perfect, I'm actually going to leave this one, and I'll just trace out the shape of the fins and whatnot, so that I can make copies of it later. Now, this is where it gets a little complicated. You are going to need a Dremel. It's why I recommend parent assistance. And you're going to need a couple other things, like the glue, some scissors. The stuff you need is basic. You'll see there's no ruler laid out here because I never did use one in the course of this. It's really easy to do. You basically make your shape and then cut it out. It's so easy. And then glue it in place. And the hardest thing about this whole build, guys, is to take this little piece. There's another one that you're going to need, so you actually get enough for 4 airplanes, because one of these you have to cut off, and shave this piece off. And that